Much and welcome everyone. Uh, Portugal is a region, a wine region that I really like for a lot of fairly selfish reasons. One, um, it, it's beautiful, as you can see behind me. This is a typical view from the Douro Valley in northern Portugal. Terraced vineyards down to this beautiful river. Humans have been traversing this river for about 500 years. And it is actually, I take that back, traversing the river for 5,000 years, 500 years, more like 4,000. It is, I apologize, but it's an area that has a very old history. It started the Etruscans. Sorry, my light just went out. There we go. Um, the 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 history of wine in Portugal began 2000 BC. Local tribes there planting grapes. The grapes were already there. Most, in fact, Portugal has roughly 250 indigenous grapes just to Portugal alone. I mean, if you go across the border to Spain, you have even more. But Spain has a little more of a diverse landscape, so it accommodates uh, more variation in the varietals. But Portugal, for its fairly compact size, has an amazing arsenal of grapes. So 2000 BC is when grapes first started showing up. That was expanded on by the Etruscans about 1,000 years later, followed by the Greeks and the Romans and invading armies from all over. And with that, I mean, particularly the Greeks and the Romans took what was happening in Portugal and spread it. They had a pretty good understanding of grape growing, but so did Portugal, and they adopted some of their techniques and perfected their game as they took grapes throughout their empires. Um, but Portugal is as old as it is, it it really is kind of uh, it's a supporting cast member. I mean, that's not even fair. It's just, I mean, they're the ninth largest exporter of wine, so that's not, they're not top five, but they still export a sizable amount of wine. They make a lot of wine, but it has some challenges, I think, that impact Portugal uniquely, that not all regions are affected. For example, um, a lot of people around the world have an understanding of Spanish, less so for Portuguese. So even though there are some grapes that are grown extensively in Spain, the knowledge of those grapes in Spanish doesn't really make any difference unless you know what the Portuguese variant is. So I mean, version is. So you may be talking about the same grape, you just don't know it. Plus, most of the grapes that they grow and grow very well are native to this area. So unless you're a big fan of Portuguese wine, or you have an awareness of Portuguese viticulture, you may not even know these grapes. So as a business, as a wine producer, it's hard to sell a consumer something from a place they may not be entirely familiar with, made with grapes that they may not be entirely familiar with, and in a language on the bottle that they may not be entirely familiar with. So it's a challenge to get these wines. Essentially, they get lost in translation. But for the wine drinker, that's actually an advantage, because if you put, say, Cabernet Sauvignon in a bottle, sadly, I wish that every bottle of Cabernet that sold well was a great bottle of wine, and that's just not true. There are a lot of Cabernet Sauvignons that are sold merely because it says Cabernet Sauvignon on the bottle, and people are looking for that particular flavor. Portugal doesn't really have that, so they can't charge you for something that um, that you don't understand. They can't, there's no premium brand to attach to most of the grapes that they use. So that puts a little price pressure on it. And it also means that if they are going to sell the wine, they better be good. And so when you pair those two things together, you have a population that has been producing wine for millennia. You have a region that is so well suited to grapes that grapes evolved on their own. I mean, that's amazing to think that hundreds. I mean, we you know, of all the grapes in the world, there's really only a tiny amount. And I mean, it'll seem like a lot because there are literally thousands, but you know, if you take a couple thousand grapes in the world that are just all part of the vine family, and those are the only ones that really can make wine, that's not a lot. And Portugal has, you know, several hundred of these very special grapes. So great traditions, great soil, great climate. And actually it's in part this river, the Douro River, that made Portuguese wine such a thing in the first place. They could create it and they could move it. I mean, this river goes out to the ocean. They could access the British market and rest of Europe, and certainly the Mediterranean. I mean, they had access because of their water. They were adjacent to water and waterways. So it really it's a very complex region that offers a really great value for wine. And I think that, you know, most people are familiar with port. Many wine drinkers are familiar with port. If you're not, port is categorized as a fortified wine. So when certain wines are, you know, the alcohol that is in that wine was created exclusively by the fermentation of that fruit. In the case of port, a still wine is made, and before the fermentation is complete, a neutral grape spirit, usually a brandy, think of a grape-based brandy, is added to the fermentation, and the yeast is killed, and it locks in the sugar, and it raises the alcohol to between 19 and 20%. And they didn't know it at the time, or we don't believe that they knew it at the time, but that actually shelf stabilizes the wine. So port can last for decades, I mean, lifetimes even. And it's all because of this magic chemistry. Unfortunately for port, it's not kind of it used to be, for example, it used to be if you were you know, British aristocracy, every child was given at birth a pipe of port. And a pipe is, I looked it up one time, maybe 50 cases of wine. Now, if somebody gave me that at birth and I had to schlep around 50 cases of port, unless I had a castle, which these people did, to store it and permanently, that'd be a real moving hassle. But that was a thing. And so the port would be stored in Portugal until the child was of old enough to take receipt, and then 50 cases of port would go to one person. We don't see that anymore. So the way that's changed is that maybe, you know, at one point the vineyards behind me would have been growing grapes for the production of port. Today they may be growing grapes for the production of the wines that we're about to taste. They definitely Portuguese wine, particularly wines from the Douro, and we've got one from the Douro today. The other one is from a region in the south, but the Douro is really a magical place. It's been a winemaking place for a very long time, and really you can taste kind of in the glass. You can taste that I mean, so many things have been dialed in. So with that said, let's start tasting the wine. I guess, first of all, anybody have any questions on Portugal as a wine region?
You can unmute if you have something. There's nothing in the chat, but if you have or so, I guess we move on.
All right. So the first wine that we'll taste is from a producer called Carm. And this is a blend of white varietals from the Douro, actually a sub-region, a very prestigious region called Douro Superior. But it's a blend of, I believe, 5 grapes. And I will tell you, one, two, three grapes. I will tell you that I mean, you go into a wine shop and you see maybe 15 grapes labeled on the wall. You know, maybe people are familiar with fewer than that, but there's a book that we reference, and I don't know if I can get it to show up on the screen, but the book is a good 3 inches thick, and it is simply called well, I want to do wine grapes. And so I had to look these grapes up in this tome, because Rabagato I was not familiar, but I think that I mean, it's an interesting. It definitely, you can see it once you think about its contribution. Codega de Larino and Viocino. Um, so let's taste it first, and then we'll talk about kind of what those grapes do in that wine. First of all, a gorgeous nose. Really kind of pretty. I actually I have a linden tree in front of my house, and when I smelled it, it reminded me of when the linden is blooming. It has that kind of white floral note. But fruit wise, I mean, lots of kind of green plum, green apple, um, green things, crunchy, malic, tart, little pineapple there. And they're so really almost like a creamy texture, still a lot of acidity. The mouth is watering, but a really nice fruit driven, very creamy texture. And actually, let's see which one. Yes. So on the grape, you'll see on the bottle, rather, you see Codego do Larino. That grape is known for being very aromatic, but also having a velvet texture, very creamy velvet texture. So you can definitely taste in the mouth, you can taste that grape kind of doing its thing. The Rabagato, the first grape listed, that kind of kicks in acidity, pretty bright acid. You're still tasting it. So you've got something that has a round texture, something that has acid, and then the Viacino is a grape that has really beautiful aromatics. So that nose that you smell is probably the Viacino showing, kind of entering showing its making its contribution. But as a blend, I mean, it's I love this wine. I mean, great fruit, great texture, great aroma, very food friendly. I mean, of course, the Portuguese, being so close to water in so much of their country, they do eat a lot of fish. They have spectacular fish, but lighter proteins by itself. It just is a very, I mean, on a hot day, this would be a delicious, real refreshing glass of wine if you were in Portugal. I think for food, definitely fish, shellfish, scallops, things like that. Lighter proteins like chicken. It I mean, even some, you could even maybe do some Asian noodles, like mildly spicy, not super spicy, but or sushi even. But really an expressive wine. And that's one of the things uh, that Portugal has always done. They You don't find a lot of mono varietal wines in Portugal. You don't see a ton of this is just this grape. I mean, they exist certainly, but more often they are fairly intricate blends, and I mean intricate where you can, like this wine, where you can pick out the contributions of each wine. It's not just, well, this is flavor, and then we add some more flavor, and then we add some more flavor. I mean, in this glass of wine, these 3 grapes all have different roles to play, and it's cool that you can see how they're making that contribution. Any questions about this wine? Thoughts?
Go ahead, please unmute if you like. If it's something you say, whether you like it or don't like it.
Jack, what are you having with it?
I'm having a little Melba toast with the tuna pate I bought in your store with a little
Nice.
cucumber, and
Yeah.
I'm also made a little tartlet with some brie in it, but I put smoked salmon, caviar, and shallots on. So a lot of
Nice.
fish.
Not absolutely. And how is it playing with the wine?
It's really nice. The acidity is just terrific with it, and yeah, I like it. I get a lot of apple and pear, as you said, but the acidity is just terrific. So it's nice with the fish for me.
Yeah. Well, and
Very
that
good.
acid, I mean, that's one of the benefits, and I think probably over time we will probably see more grapes from Portugal being planted outside of Portugal, simply because they are fairly well dialed in for their environment, and they don't, as you can see behind me, it's not a a lush green, lots of rain. I mean, it's fairly arid. It can get a little warm, and the nice thing is, these grapes don't mind that. And so, instead of some grapes, if you grow them in this environment, they essentially cook off all the acid. They develop more sugar and not enough acid, and so it doesn't really balance the wine. But these grapes have evolved that way. So it is some industry people's expectation that these grapes will be you will find a home they will find a home elsewhere, around the world, for to take advantage of these great characteristics that they have. So yeah, I love that. I mean, the fruit is just perfectly ripe, and I mean, perfectly ripe fruit. I mean, when you think about it, it always has a nice supporting amount of acid. I mean, even that perfectly ripe peach, it's not all sweet. There's just a little bit of acid that keeps it from being cloying and makes your mouth water, and just kind of encapsulates the idea of a juicy piece of fruit. I mean, this wine is juicy. It has a juiciness to it.
One comment from Clifton, interesting. He goes, I noticed a sweet note on the tip of my tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a really good point.
I,
Yeah, I
I
mean, that sweetness, that sweetness definitely. I mean, it's a fruit ripeness. It's not like, I mean, sweet. We often people will talk about things being sweet or too sweet, and sweetness is really, I mean, it's a subtle thing. I mean, because you can have the most intense dessert wine from, say, France, say a bottle of Sauterne. You can have this really intense, viscous, very sweet wine. However, the wine still has acid to it. Your mouth still waters when you have it. It's not like you're just drinking sugar syrup. So the acid in a wine, I mean, in wine appreciation, one of the things that we're always looking for is balance. I mean, balance is, a hallmark of great food. It's a hallmark of great wine, spirits, beer, whatever. I mean, it balances. We all want to achieve, kind of balance, and it is, acid gives the wine a beautiful balance, and really without it, it just seems. I mean, if you took the acid out of this wine, it would seem clumsy. It might be cloying. It would seem kind of structureless. But that bright acidity just kind of brightens it up. It brings it back into focus. Yeah, I really dig this wine. All right. Shall we move on to the red?
oh, excuse me. I noticed that it's aged in stainless steel tanks. I've had Chardonnay in stainless steel tanks that doesn't have the buttery flavor. Is that changing the flavor of this?
So the buttery flavor of Chardonnay is actually a funny thing. It it's a separate, it's actually I mean, it's referred to as malolactic fermentation. It's not actually fermentation. I mean, sugar is not being consumed, and alcohol and carbon dioxide are not being created. Malolactic fermentation is a chemical fermentation where a bacteria changes chemically the malic acid into lactic acid. So green apple acid into milk acid. So it softens it. The butter part is part of there's a natural product created through a certain bacteria called diacetyl. And diacetyl is the smell that you smell when you get movie theater popcorn or butter. Movie theater popcorn basically is this naturally occurring smell called diacetyl, and usually like coconut oil, no butter at all. And so Chardonnay producers can create, they can essentially encourage the creation of this flavor through this bacteria where it will create naturally in the barrel this chemical called diacetyl. But as far as this wine, oftentimes, I mean, stainless steel is probably, I mean, is certainly more common as a fermentation device for white wine. In part, it's just not all white wine needs oak. That's the first thing, and there is the expense. So red wine, if you buy a very expensive bottle of red wine, a part of that cost is that it may have, I mean, a lot of money was spent on the oak barrel that it went into. If it's like French oak, that could be thousands of dollars just for one barrel. So in this case, my guess is the very high acid grapes, those are the ones that went into oak, because the oak it's not going to impart the flavor of oak, and they can actually prevent the flavors, the creation of diacetyl. But what the oak does is kind of softens the acid. There will be some of that malolactic conversion. So what might have been a screaming highly acidic wine can be tempered a little bit, rounded out, the sharp edges blunted a little bit through barrel aging. And it's, I mean, the barrel is a beautiful thing. It breathes, it expands and contracts with temperature. I mean, that's why generally we like to control that as much as possible and keep those barrels in a cool, humid environment. But the barrel allows just a tiny amount of oxygen to permeate the wine, and that actually helps to create more flavors. I mean, flavors generally are created when things oxidize. I mean, if you prevent a wine from oxidizing, say you pour it in a glass and then you cover that glass with the top, it's not going to smell like much because oxygen hasn't opened it up. And so the barrel just allows just a little bit of air into the wine to kind of bring about a more complex aging process. But yeah, this stainless, like I said, stainless steel is probably most common in white wine, just because they're really looking to maintain wines that have a pretty pronounced acid level. I mean, bright acidity. Chardonnay does go into barrels. There are others. Heavier, fuller-bodied white wines will that are intended for age will often go into barrels, because the barrel provides I mean, it slows the aging down, and it gives it a chemistry through that aging process that will help it last longer once it's out of the barrel. But did that answer the question? That kind of rambled a little bit, but hopefully that got to the barrel versus stainless question. Are we ready to move on to the next one?
One more question.
Okay.
Kim asked, I've lost you. Did you hear the question, Steve?
Oh, I didn't. I did not. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This wine has a vegan label. Aren't all
Mhm.
wines vegan?
So no. And it it's it's becoming more of an issue. I'm not sure that I think it necessarily has to be, simply because it, well, let me explain why it's not, why some wines aren't vegan. So and this goes back to the lengthy history of winemaking. It didn't take human beings that long to observe that, all things equal, if you could get this wine to look like it does, like where that's polished white gold, it's clear, there are no floaters in it, it just has, we taste it with our eyes first. I mean, it's a brilliant white gold color, just looks beautiful. Well, people figured that out, and they're like, well, how can we get this to be more clear? And gravity helps, certainly, and there are a lot of most winemakers will utilize gravity because it's free. Sometimes I mean, there are other filtration methods, but that is primarily, gravity is the one. But there's another process called fining, and fining is where you add something to the liquid that causes the particulates in the wine, and that with these, we're talking about like really small pieces of, I mean, tiny pieces of ground up skin, not human skin, grape skin, little, pieces of crushed seed, pieces of stem. It causes all of those things to basically create a molecular bond, become heavy, and then fall to the bottom, fall out of suspension. And so humans figured out that there are a number of things that you can use to cause this process to happen. The two that create an issue for the vegan issue is, there is a fining material, and I may mispronounce it, but isinglass, but it's fish bladders. It's dried, ground up fish bladders, and this powder is put into the tank, it's stirred around, and doing what it does, it causes all of the particulates to clump together, to become heavy, to fall to the bottom of the tank where they're removed. So fish bladders are one. And this is often more used with red wine, and I don't know why, but egg whites, egg whites are used, and we're not talking about a lot. I mean, I want to say for a barrel of wine, which holds about 25 cases of wine, they would use the equivalent of one or maybe two egg whites, not the fat part. Now, again, the egg white is stirred into a barrel in fairly minor amounts, and the proteins that are floating around in the wine clump together and they settle out. So now going back to the vegan issue. So yes, technically, at one point, something that was animal-based was added to the wine. But what the job that it does by its nature means that all of it, if close to all of it, will actually do its job and collect all the stuff and will be removed. So while there is the potential presence, if it did its job, all of that stuff was removed from the wine. However, the wine industry is concerned with making consumers happy, and so they have looked to vegan methods. I mean, bentonite clay is one. There's some other minerals that can be used that do the same thing. They grab on to particulates and settle out to the bottom where it's then removed. And in fact, about a year ago, I was visiting a barrel cooperage in Napa Valley, barrel cooperage called Demptos. And Demptos makes all sorts of barrels. I mean, French, American, Romanian, Hungarian, oak barrels from all over the world, and they have had a great demand because there used to be a paste that would be made with I think it was just flour. I think it was just flour and water. But demand for not just vegan barrels, because I can't remember how they bring in the vegan issue with the barrel, but they're also doing gluten-free barrels. So they've exchanged that, they use this paste to seal the staves in the barrel, and now they have this cellulose medium that goes in between. So things like gluten-free wine and vegan wine, if the customer wants that, the producers will attempt to oblige. But for the most part, I will say, you're not drinking, egg whites when you drink a glass of wine, or fish bladders for that matter.
One more question before we move to the red. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. What is the closest wine this compares to? And I'm presuming, tell me if I'm wrong, Cliff, that he means a wine varietal we know.
Yeah. So actually, the wine that this most reminds me of would probably be a Sauvignon Blanc from California. Sauvignon Blanc from California is a little fuller body. A fair amount of the time, it actually does see oak aging. I mean, there are a lot of typically higher end, but barrel aged, barrel fermented, barrel aged Sauvignon Blanc. So probably with the flavor profile, I don't get as much citrus. Usually Sauvignon Blanc will lean a little more citrusy. I get more like green fruits, apple, pear, green apple, green pear, green plum, greenness. I don't get the citrus, but if I had to pick one wine that would reflect it, would probably be like a California, because New Zealand would be a little too edgy, a little too bright, too much acid, and would lean very much in the direction of citrus. So this is, this has a little more, has a hint of tropical fruit. I get kind of like that pineapple or mango or something there. But yeah, Sauvignon Blanc, I think would be my choice in the most familiar. But yeah, not an edgy style, but yeah.
I think that's it right now.
All right. So we'll go to this next wine. Let me pour a glass. So I picked this wine because in part it represents kind of one, I mean, that first white, that to me, I mean, that represents the modern Douro Valley. And I will say, the Douro in Portugal is truly their very best top tier wine growing region. I mean, nobody even comes close to the quality of wine that's made in the Douro. So it's sort of unfair because everybody already is going to be second or third or fourth or fifth or whatever. But that first wine, that white, I mean, that's a great example of this very old region embracing what they do well and sticking with that. I mean, they're, like I said, they list the grapes on the bottle, and I had never heard of any of them. I had to look all of them up. This next wine comes from a region called Alentejo, and Alentejo is in the south central part of Portugal. It's inland. There's a lot of bulk produced, and I don't mean bulk in a bad way. I mean, it's just a large, high production wine region. And a lot of the wines that they're using here, I mean, that they're producing here, take advantage of, a great wine region, great wine growing skills, great viticulture skills, but they're not so rigid with the grapes they're using. So, and I didn't find it on the bottle, but I did look up the blend on this red. it starts with Aragones, and that here's an example of where the cross between Spain and Portugal doesn't things don't carry as easily as you might want them to. Aragones is Tempranillo, so Spain is very very popular. I mean, Tempranillo is one of Spain's signature red grapes. Here it is, and actually I should say it. Tempranillo has like hundreds. I mean, just a ridiculous number of synonyms. Every little town has given it its own name for their version of Tempranillo. But in this part of Spain, Aragones is I mean, in this part of Portugal, Aragones is Tempranillo. The second grape is a grape called Alicante Bouschet, and Alicante is a French grape that has done very very well actually in both Spain and Portugal. But this area is, I mean, this grape has had, I mean, its history began in France, and then Trincadera, and this grape is indigenous to Portugal. So you have a grape that is unique to that region. And then the last one is Cabernet Sauvignon. Now they probably didn't need to use the Cabernet Sauvignon, but by putting it in there, somebody buying this wine at least has the idea, well, I know that one grape. I've heard of that one grape. And that creates a little bit of familiarity. But the wines coming out of Alentejo are really they're sort of, I mean, I want to use the word hybrid because that actually is a hybrid wine is, I mean, hybrid grapes are a thing, but these wines are sort of hybrid old world, new world. You have or traditional Portuguese and international. I mean, they will often slip in their whites. They might slip in Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay or something like that, just to give it some attention. To I at least I know the consumer in the American market can say, at least I know that grape, and I can develop some ideas about the wine based on that. But they certainly don't have to do that. But yeah, this region, Alentejo does a lot more wines that definitely see the export market. I mean, Douro wines see the export market and wine cellars. I mean, they're highly sought after, and wines from Alentejo are more kind of value driven and more tailored to be I guess more tailored to be all things to all people, as it were. But let's taste this red São Miguel do Sul with pride from the land of cork. It is pretty cool, actually. I want to say the cork forests, I believe the cork forests are in Alentejo or surrounding them, but a number of years ago, people were coming to the store and saying, yeah, I want to recycle my cork, and I hear there's a cork shortage. And it was actually a number of different issues. I mean, number one, cork is recyclable, can be repurposed into footbeds for shoes and all sorts of other things. But the issue with the cork, I mean, the forests in Portugal have been producing cork for hundreds of years. They are impeccably managed forests. The problem that arose was that they, at some point, and they think it was probably the early 80s, people started using as a general practice a weed spray around the cork trees that contained a small amount of chlorine. And when that chlorine got onto the bark, and so cork comes from an oak tree, Quercus suber, but every 10 years, you can basically run these massive straight razors down the side of the tree, peel back the bark, and it will grow right back. So it's an amazing renewable resource. So that losing the bark doesn't bother the tree at all. But what was happening was that the chlorine that they were using in the weed spray around the base of these oak trees was penetrating the cork and encouraging the growth of bacteria that would leave the cork smelling like soggy newspaper. It's a bacteria called 2,4,6 trichloranisole. And that was the problem. It wasn't so much that there was a cork shortage, that their trees were infected with TCA, and they were having to run through the production to get back to clean cork. And TCA was, I mean, in the 90s, TCA was responsible, 90s and probably early aughts, maybe through the aughts even. I don't know when they really got a hold of it. I mean, it's definitely better today, but when I started selling wine in the 90s, roughly 5%, 5 out of every 100 bottles would be tainted with this TCA. And as we discovered, it because Portugal produces so much cork, that largely that problem was created in the cork forests back in the day. But anyway, yeah, that's the reference to the land of cork. But anyway, so on this wine, I mean, this is one of the things that, I mean, this smells like a very classic Portuguese red. Lots of briary, brambly fruits, blackberries, black raspberries, kind of, yeah, lots of brambly berries, maybe some plum, black plum, cherry. And then there's this little bit of a kind of a cinnamon or a clove note. That actually, it's interesting that, so in this case, that clove note, and it kind of stands proud in the glass. You can smell it right on the top. That clove note is that Trincandera grape. It's known for having this dark spice note that kind of shows up. And so in the interest of giving the wine a little, kind of an exotic spice profile, they will do that. They will add this grape.
There are, if I can interrupt just a second, there are a couple questions already. So I guess the question basically is, the familiar wine, meaning the Cabernet that you talked about, that variety, is that being imported, or are they growing that variety in Portugal?
Yeah, they are growing that. All of these grapes are being grown there.
Right.
I mean, like I said, the funny part about it is, of all countries, Portugal and Spain are probably the two, or at least two places that would never need to import grapes. I mean, France and Italy certainly are also in those categories, but I mean, they have so many indigenous grapes that can do so many different things, that bringing in grapes that are I mean, I think probably, I mean, why would they use, say, like Alicante Bouschet and Cabernet Sauvignon? Well, because they're known quantities. They know exactly what they do. They've been grown for, to be used in certain ways. So they have that track record. So there is some comfort in knowing that if they add this grape, it will, if they add this grape to this product, it will do certain things.
But they're growing that grape themselves.
Yes. All the grapes are grown. All of the grapes are being grown and produced, and the wine is being produced in Alentejo.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's one other question. Is there a label for Portuguese wine like AOC in France and DOG in Italy?
Yes. So you will see, well, it actually, so yes, on the back of the bottle, you'll see DOP Douro, a little sticker on the back, and probably a serial number that will link this bottle to a production record. But yes, Portugal does have, in fact, they've had it forever. I want to say maybe 1750, 1740 is when the demarcated growing region of Port was established. So since the mid 1700s, Portugal has had a region where standards were controlled, quality was controlled, label was controlled. I mean, it's really crazy. These ideas, I mean, The Greeks and the Romans understood branding very well, and those traditions still endure. I mean, why, if you make a wine that can only be made there, you need to protect that brand, and protecting that brand means protecting the quality. So we like the idea of AOCs, or in the United States, we have American Viticultural Areas, AVAs. I mean, that idea has been around for a long time. And yes, absolutely. Portugal has many. I don't know how many total DOs they have. But there are different quality levels. I mean, like for example, the Douro has a subregion called Douro Superior, which is a better appellation or a better DO than just Douro. But yes, yeah, very old tradition of that regulated growing region. Any other questions?
Any questions? Anybody? Any opinions?
We were in Portugal in February, and one of the things that they were having, that they said it was kind of common, was their green wine. And we had it a couple of times. What is that?
So Vino Verde is a wine. It's both a wine region, a DO, a protected growing region, as well as a wine style. And the region is in the far north. It's fairly cool, fairly mountainous. It's further north than the Douro Valley. And there are a number of grapes that can be used in Vino Verde. I want to say Orinto, one other, are the most common, but essentially they are the Vino Verde is a wine it can be made in a number of styles. The vast majority of those styles are in kind of wine that would be immediately consumed, vintage dated Vino Verde, something that you would have maybe a 2021 or a 2022 bottling of. You like them young because they have a little bit of a dissolved CO2 in it, so it gives it this little spritziness. I mean, Vino Verde, I love Vino Verde. It tastes like a wine version of club soda with a squeeze of lemon and lime. I mean, it's not very complicated. It's not very complicated. It's highly refreshing. You want to drink a lot. It is the nice thing is it's fairly low alcohol, so you can have a little more. It's a great little luncheon wine, or luncheon bottle sometimes. But so that's one style, and I would say the vast majority of Vino Verde is produced in that. Drink it young. It's have it as you're kind of sitting out at a table like this with your friends, very casual. They do make some nicer, kind of more, I guess, slightly more ageable Vino Verdes. A little more higher quality grapes from higher quality regions. So there are certainly some higher end Vino Verdes, but most of them are done in that kind of light, easy drinking style. The challenge with Vino Verde, and we found a lot of Vino Verde is bottled as non-vintage, and non-vintage basically means there is no single vintage that represents that particular batch. And we've got a couple producers that we found that while they are non-vintage, they go through so much of it that it still is a young wine. But every once in a while we'll try a Vino Verde that might be a little long in the tooth, and the lemon lime is still there, but so is a little bit of kind of nuttiness, which I don't usually ask for some roasted nuts in my vodka soda or whatever. It just it kind of changes the composition when it gets a little old. But that's the only problem that I have with Vino Verde is oftentimes it's a little too old for its best showing. But now when it's young and fresh, it's so good. It's delicious.
We have a couple questions to go back to the red, although I will
Yes.
say one of the most attractive things about Vinho Verde is it's cheap, but
Yes.
can be
Well,
cheap, and
no, it
it's a
actually, no,
great effervescent wine
yeah.
in the summer. But
It
at
it
any rate,
actually it doesn't always have to be cheap. There are
that's
Vino
true.
Verdes that go up to about the 30-35 mark. Yeah.
But there are two other questions. I'll ask you both, and maybe you can kind of put it together. Uh, One of the questions on the red is suggested food pairings, and the other one is where would you put this particular red on the spectrum of Portuguese reds?
So, I food pairings, was that the first question? Yes.
Yeah, food pairings
Yes.
with the red.
Okay. So, um this pour another little splash of it. I would say that it has enough tannic structure to stand up to a lot of proteins. I mean, it it it's it's a little juicy. I think that um the juiciness of the wine. I mean, and when I mean juicy, I mean like literally that's what your mouth is doing. It's watering. Um, the juiciness of this wine, it could, I mean, I would say a burger would probably be as full on the beef side. I mean, a steak, it could definitely do a steak. I don't know if it would really make that steak shine. Um, I would be intrigued to try it with barbecue because it's got a lot of those fruit and spice notes that we generally like in our barbecue. Um, but I think that also, I mean, if you had maybe a piece of salmon, grilled salmon, I mean, you'd probably want it grilled more than say poached or steamed or some lighter treatment. I mean, you'd want some little stronger notes to that. But I think a fish like salmon could go, certainly chicken, pork. But it I would say probably doesn't need, where it's got a splash of cab. I wouldn't treat it like a straight cab where I would have it, maybe with a big, steak with some compound buttered on top of it. I
I,
mean,
I will tell you, I noticed that with the tuna pate, it just really didn't work. Too
yeah.
light.
Sure.
But with the
Yeah.
salmon and caviar, it was better. But that's not a great pairing. But it was
Yeah.
better with the smoked salmon and the caviar.
Yeah, no, I think with that one, I would want it. I think I'd want some like grill marks on it. I'd want some char
Yeah,
to
lamb.
kind
I
of
think lamb would be
stand
great.
lamb. So yes, I mean certainly lamb would be spectacular because lamb. So one of the major grapes of this blend is the Portuguese version of Tempranillo, and if you were to go over the mountains and kind of splash down in on the other side of the Douro Valley on the Spain side, certainly lamb would be one of their signature dishes. They do spectacular lamb dishes. Just I mean, literally over the border from the Douro on the Spanish side, and
And
so definitely lamb.
before I
Go
forget it,
ahead.
the other part of the question was on the spectrum of reds in Portugal,
Mhm.
where would you put this particular wine?
So I would say this is fairly, and I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to call it. I mean, this would be like an everyday drinker. This is not a wine that you would stockpile in your cellar. It's not going to improve with age. It's just a wine that, it's a Tuesday night or something and you're having a glass of wine. I mean, because certainly, I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, Portugal has wines that from more so from the Douro, still wines that will last 30 years in a cellar and have a complexity like a top shelf Bordeaux. I would not say this is that. This would be kind of again an everyday quaffable, very fairly food versatile red. So this is kind of what I mean. I guess this is. I guess now I'm gonna say this. So this would be like the entry level kind of what Portugal has to offer. It kind of no frills, but there's a lot to like about this guy. It's a good price. The quality is there. It's more than one note. I mean, oftentimes one of our biggest. I mean, it's the good thing in the wine world is that wine has gotten less obviously flawed. I mean, it used to be that the wines were just clearly flawed and you didn't need to spend much time with them, and now it's like, well, the flaw is that it was manipulated, or the flaw is that it is boring. I mean, just the fact that it has nothing to say, it's just a one, it says this, my smell and taste is wine, very general. And so when you're looking at a wine, and certainly a wine like at this price point, 13 whatever bucks, it is, you're looking for things like, is this a balanced wine? And I would say it's got some nice balance. It does have acid, it does have structure, does have tannin. Does it have multiple things going on? I taste both fruit and spice. And would it drink well with a variety of food? And I think it probably would. Like, I guess for me, if I were kind of categorizing this wine, like a barbecue wine, like whatever you're throwing on the grill, like some chickens, I mean, simple, everyday, just not comfort food so much, but yeah, comfort food. I mean, stuff that we would cook regularly that you just want a glass of wine to go with it. And I mean, like, you could have this with chili. You could have this with, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I think this wine could pair well with, where in fact, arguably some of the higher end versions of Portuguese wine might not. It might be, overpowering, or just, you really need a certain type of food to let it stand out. But so yeah, I would say I would characterize this as kind of like,
He's a little frozen. So
go ahead. Am I good?
yeah, I was just we're getting to the end of the time, so I was just gonna, knowing Steve, I would say a Tuesday wine is better than a Thursday wine, but not as good as a Saturday wine.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm only
yeah,
kidding, but
yeah.
we're kind of running out of time, so we're gonna have to call it a night. I'm going to desperately say to all of you, obrigado a todos, se juntarnos para esta noite, which is the extent of my Portuguese almost. I did spend some time in Brazil where it's terribly mispronounced. But thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it for you joining us. And I'm really excited that he did Portugal. I like a lot of their wines. They're really
Yes,
great.
please drink more Portuguese wine.
Absolutely. Not so much that the price goes up, however.
No, 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 no.
Okay. So thank you very much. Just a quick note before goodbye. We have Dessert and a Movie tomorrow night. If you haven't signed up, a very interesting movie about common good, about a co-op that was formed during redlining in Chicago. And we have the woman who runs the Historical Society and the filmmaker as our guest tomorrow night. We have Good for You Nutrition on Thursday. Friday we have our coffee break. So we're still chugging through 6 things this week. Hopefully we have enough stuff that you guys enjoy. And if I don't see you for any of those, thank you for being here tonight. And we'll see you all.
Be well.
Next time we meet.
Thanks so much.
All right, thanks. As always, it was good.
Thank you.